She vanished just days before her 10th birthday. While the world searched frantically, no one could imagine the unthinkable. Katie Beers wasn't far. She was beneath their feet, behind walls, hidden in a homemade dungeon. The man who promised to protect her had built her a tomb, and for 17 days she lived in the dark, waiting to die. Katie Beers was a shy, soft-spoken 9-year-old girl living in a chaotic world filled with neglect and broken promises. Her home life was unstable, marred by emotional distance and abusive surroundings. She often found herself shuttled between family members and so-called friends of the family, adults who showed more interest in control than care. In this whirlwind of dysfunction, one man had become a constant: John Esposito. To most people he was just a quirky, reclusive family acquaintance. To Katie he was someone she was told to trust. And so, when he offered to take her out for a day of fun just before her 10th birthday, there was no real reason to say no. At least not yet. On December 28, 1992, John took Katie to a local video arcade on Long Island. It was supposed to be a simple outing, something normal for a child craving attention. But Katie never returned. Esposito told police she had vanished in the arcade's parking lot, abducted by an unknown man. It sounded like the kind of random crime parents fear most: a child snatched in broad daylight. The story sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community. Volunteers flooded the streets. Flyers with Katie's picture were stapled to telephone poles. Local news ran the story on loop. Everyone seemed desperate to help. Everyone except the man who had last seen her. From the very beginning, something felt off about John Esposito's version of events. His story was too neat, too conveniently timed. The surveillance footage from the arcade didn't quite match his description. His demeanor during interviews was strangely detached. He showed no signs of fear, panic, or grief. When questioned by detectives, he gave rehearsed answers and deflected too easily. Behind the scenes, police began to suspect that the man who had reported her missing might know more than he was letting on. John had a past, one that didn't surface immediately. Years earlier, he had been implicated in another child-related incident, although it never led to charges. He was a loner, a man with few friends who lived in a house that seemed built to keep people out. Police began to dig deeper. They revisited his background, traced his steps, and slowly peeled back layers of carefully maintained secrecy. Esposito cooperated, perhaps too much. He offered polygraphs. He made public pleas. He even allowed limited searches of his home. But it was all surface level. He controlled what the police saw and what they didn't. Meanwhile, Katie's mother appeared overwhelmed, sometimes oddly disconnected. The more the public learned about her home life, the more they wondered whether the child had fallen through the cracks long before she ever disappeared. Rumors surfaced about neglect and a history of abuse, but nothing concrete enough to explain what might have happened. Still, the questions piled up. Where was Katie? Why were the adults in her life so inconsistent? And why did John Esposito seem more concerned with managing the narrative than finding the child? The investigation intensified. Tips flowed in from all over the state, but none led to Katie. Police re-interviewed Esposito multiple times. They observed him. They waited for him to slip. And eventually he did. One small inconsistency, a minor change in his timeline, sparked renewed suspicion. Detectives pressed harder. The pressure mounted, and then shockingly John cracked. 17 days after Katie disappeared, he walked into a police station and uttered a chilling phrase: "She's alive." The revelation was as surreal as it was horrifying. For over 2 weeks, while the world searched in panic, Katie had been hidden in a place no one imagined. Esposito led police to his home and revealed a soundproof dungeon beneath his garage, a secret room behind a fake wall, accessible through a trapdoor. It was damp, dark, and meticulously engineered. Inside, curled up on a mattress, was Katie Beers. She was thin, pale, but alive. Her voice was soft but clear. She had been alone in that underground prison while the world screamed her name. Her captor had fed her, watched her through cameras, and manipulated her mind in an attempt to maintain control. But Katie had survived. She had stayed alert. And perhaps most incredibly, she had memorized every detail of her environment, right down to the layout of the dungeon. She would later recount those details with unnerving clarity. The community that once feared the worst now struggled to comprehend the truth. The man who had seemed like a helpful family friend had been planning the abduction for years. And the girl everyone had nearly given up on had managed to outlast his twisted plan. But the horror of her physical captivity was only the beginning. As investigators prepared for what came next, they realized that the most disturbing part of Katie's story wasn't just what happened inside the walls of that hidden room, It was what her life had been like before she ever entered it. And so, while the search for Katie ended, the deeper story of betrayal, survival and justice was just beginning to unfold. The chamber was unlike anything investigators had ever seen. A claustrophobic, coffin-like cell constructed beneath John Esposito's detached garage. To access it, one had to move a heavy piece of furniture, lift a hidden trapdoor beneath a rug, and descend into a man-made dungeon, no larger than a walk-in closet. The walls were lined with soundproofing material. There was a small cot, a single light bulb, a fan, a bucket, a TV, and an intercom system that allowed Esposito to monitor every sound Katie made. This wasn't an impulsive crime. It was premeditated to the finest, most horrifying detail. Katie Beers had spent 17 days inside this prison. She was just 9 years old, yet her ability to mentally survive the torment defied explanation. Esposito, the man who had once promised to look after her, now treated her like a possession, feeding her when he chose, speaking to her through a speaker system, recording her every movement. The room was sealed shut from the outside. Katie couldn't scream, couldn't escape, and couldn't even stand up fully. Every moment was defined by fear and uncertainty. At first, she had no idea how long she would be there. Days passed without clear markers of time. Esposito would occasionally bring her snacks or meals, but there was no routine, no consistency, just manipulation. He played the role of both captor and caretaker, alternating between cruelty and feigned kindness. He kept her isolated, telling her that no one was looking for her, that the police thought she had run away, and that no one cared whether she was found. But Katie, despite her young age and traumatic past, was sharper than he realized. She didn't believe him. Instead of panicking, Katie paid attention. She listened closely to the sounds above, the opening of the trapdoor, the hum of a vehicle engine, footsteps. She mapped the sounds, learned the intervals between his visits, and memorized everything in the room. Her mind became her weapon. She realized quickly that the only way out was not to resist, but to make him believe she was compliant, obedient, even grateful. It was a mask she wore for her survival. Esposito seemed to be playing out a fantasy. He created a bizarre environment where he was in total control, but he also relied on Katie for emotional validation. He would talk to her about his problems, try to win her affection, and even promised to let her go eventually if she behaved. He was delusional, believing he could manipulate her into forming a bond with him, despite having ripped her from the world above. But Katie saw through the illusion. She didn't cry in front of him. She didn't beg. She played the role he wanted while inside she plotted. She paid attention to the codes he entered on the lock, the items he brought down, the exact time he came and went. It was all information she could use, if she ever got out. And while her physical freedom was locked behind steel and concrete, her mind was far from broken. She created stories in her head. She practiced what she would say if she were rescued. She even rehearsed how she would recount her experiences in perfect detail, to make sure she would be believed. Meanwhile, Esposito's psychological game began to waver. The pressure outside was building. The police kept circling back, asking more questions, demanding clarity. Katie's disappearance was not being treated as just another missing child case anymore. It had become national news. With every passing day, Esposito's confidence cracked just a bit more. He started acting erratically. The routine changed. He seemed agitated. Katie sensed it. She knew something was about to happen, she just didn't know what. On the 17th day, the door opened again. Esposito looked different. Tense. Sweaty. He didn't speak much. Hours later, Katie heard noises above her. More footsteps, heavier ones, more than one voice. Then came the moment she had imagined again and again. The trapdoor creaked open, and this time, it wasn't Esposito's face peering down. It was a detective. When they found her, Katie didn't scream or cry. She calmly described everything, how she had been taken, how she had been kept, and what Esposito had done. Investigators were stunned by her composure, her precision, and her memory. She guided them through the room's construction, explained the intercom system, and described the manipulative conversations Esposito had initiated. Every detail she gave was verifiable. Her recollection was airtight. The dungeon itself became key evidence. It was horrifying not just because it existed, but because it was proof that Esposito had planned all of this long in advance. This wasn't the act of a desperate man, it was the realization of a cold, calculated fantasy. The wiring, the ventilation, the layered soundproofing, it was all installed methodically, as if he had rehearsed this scenario in his mind countless times. It made the case even more chilling. And through it all, the most haunting part wasn't the steel walls or hidden entrance. It was the idea that Katie had survived it, not just physically but mentally. She hadn't lost herself in the dark. She had used the darkness to sharpen her senses. The child who had once been invisible to the adults in her life had now become the key to bringing down a monster who thought he could hide his crimes behind walls and silence. But Katie Beers had learned how to speak without a voice, and now the world was listening. Katie Beers didn't emerge from captivity broken. She emerged transformed. The moment she stepped out of that underground cell, the world shifted its gaze, from a frightened, missing child to a young survivor with a harrowing story to tell. Her rescue made headlines nationwide, but the real storm was just beginning. What Katie revealed in the days and weeks that followed would send shockwaves through law enforcement, social services, and the community that had failed to protect her. She was brought into police custody for safety and evaluation, and even among seasoned detectives, there was an unspoken awe in how she carried herself. Despite everything she had endured, 17 days in a dark, soundproof dungeon, alone with her captor, Katie spoke with clarity, honesty, and disturbing precision. She recounted every detail: the room, the trapdoor, the intercom system, the manipulation, the false promises, and the games Esposito played. But her revelations didn't stop there. What stunned investigators more was what she shared about her life before the abduction. Katie didn't portray herself as a girl who had everything taken from her. She spoke like someone who had never been given anything to begin with. She described a childhood of neglect, of bouncing between indifferent relatives and manipulative adults. She spoke of being treated like an afterthought, a burden. Most disturbingly, she quietly hinted at years of sexual abuse at the hands of people who were supposed to protect her. Her statement sparked a new wave of investigation, not only into Esposito's twisted actions but into Katie's entire support system. Authorities turned their focus on her godmother, Linda, and her mother, Marilyn. Both women had long claimed to be looking out for Katie's best interests, but in reality, they had enabled years of mistreatment. Katie had been used, emotionally and financially. Her food was rationed. Her presence was tolerated but never cherished. She had been passed around like property, never offered the basic love and safety every child deserves. The judicial system began to realize that Esposito's crime, as horrific as it was, had merely brought to light a larger, systemic failure. Katie was failed not just by a predator, but by everyone who ignored the red flags. Her situation became a lightning rod for discussions about child welfare reform. Social workers were forced to examine how a girl in such obvious distress could fall through every possible crack. She had been surrounded by adults, yet truly cared for by none. Esposito's arrest led to charges of kidnapping, sexual abuse, and unlawful imprisonment. He initially attempted to downplay the severity of his actions, suggesting he had fallen in love with Katie and only wanted to protect her from a worse life. But the courtroom wasn't interested in his twisted rationalizations. Katie's calm and courageous testimony crushed any illusion of innocence he tried to maintain. She faced him from the witness stand with quiet defiance, never flinching, never folding. Her words painted the truth with devastating clarity. The trial ended with Esposito being sentenced to 15 years to life in prison, though many believed no sentence could truly fit the crime. But the real justice came not from how long he would serve, it came from the voice of the girl he tried to silence. Katie didn't fade into the background after the trial. She chose to take control of her own narrative. Placed with a foster family who truly cared for her, she began the slow, painful process of healing. Therapy sessions revealed years of trauma, but also layers of resilience no one expected from a child her age. Over time, Katie began to speak out publicly. She granted interviews. She told her story not as a victim, but as a warning, a symbol, and eventually, a beacon. She wanted people to see that abuse and danger don't always wear obvious masks. Monsters can live next door. Sometimes they even have the keys to your house. She spoke about manipulation, about the importance of listening to children, and about the signs that adults so often ignore. Her voice became a tool for education and reform. In the years that followed, Katie became an advocate. She worked with lawmakers and organizations focused on child protection. Her story inspired changes in how social services approached cases of suspected abuse. More rigorous background checks were implemented. More weight was given to a child's words when they claimed neglect or mistreatment. And through it all, Katie continued to grow, not just out of her trauma but beyond it. Her name became more than a headline. It became a reminder. A reminder that children can survive even the darkest circumstances, but only if the world listens. A reminder that silence can be a cage and believing a child can be the key to unlocking it. Katie never chose the pain she endured, but she chose what to do with it, and that choice turned her into something far stronger than her captor ever imagined. Katie Beer's story didn't end in the dungeon beneath a garage. It began there. In that quiet, buried space where she was meant to be forgotten, she found the strength to endure. And when she rose from that darkness, she carried with her a truth too powerful to ignore. A truth that changed not only her life but the lives of countless others who would finally be seen, heard, and saved because of her.